What if a kingdom's fate rested on a secret message sewn into a dress? How many thrones were saved or lost because of a spy no one ever knew existed? Could a queen's whisper in the right ear redirect the flow of power across an entire continent? History is often told through battles and treaties, but the real stories, the ones that truly shaped our world, were often written in invisible ink. They were carried by people who lived in the shadows, serving monarchs who understood that knowledge was the most powerful weapon of all. These queens were not just figureheads. They were spy masters. They built networks of informants, decoders, and agents who operated in plain sight and in total secrecy. Their intelligence operations decided wars, exposed traitors, and secured their legacies. But their stories are rarely told. Number 17 did one letter cost a queen her head. A single sheet of paper, intercepted in August 1586, held the fate of a nation. It contained 358 characters of coded text. The man who decoded it, Thomas Philippes, added a small drawing of a gallows on the outside before sending it on. Within a year, a queen would be executed. The network that caught her was run for another queen, Elizabeth I of England. Elizabeth I inherited a fractured kingdom. Threats were everywhere. Foreign powers wanted to see her replaced. Factions at home plotted against her. Her very survival depended on knowing who was a friend and who was an enemy. She found her answer in Francis Walsingham. He became her spy master. He built a machine of intelligence unlike anything England had ever seen. Walsingham's network was vast. He had agents in every major court in Europe. He had informants in Rome, Paris, Madrid, and Lisbon. His payroll in the 1580s listed at least 53 agents in foreign countries. He also had a huge number of informers inside England. These were not just professional spies. They were merchants, students, sailors, and priests. Anyone who might overhear a piece of useful information could be recruited. He paid them well. His annual budget for intelligence was over £2,000, a massive sum at the time. This was more than the salary of most high-ranking government officials. The system was built on a simple idea: information is power. Walsingham wanted to know everything. He read intercepted mail. His agents used ciphers to send their reports. Walsingham employed experts to break the codes of his enemies. Thomas Philippes was his master codebreaker. He was a linguistic genius, fluent in multiple languages, and an expert in cryptography. He could look at a page of symbols and see the hidden words. The most famous success of this network was the discovery of the Babington plot. This was a plan to assassinate Elizabeth and place her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne. Mary had been imprisoned in England for nearly 20 years. She was a constant source of concern for Elizabeth's government. The plotters saw her as the rightful heir. The plotters, led by a young man named Anthony Babington, were careless. They believed their communication with Mary was secure. They used a sophisticated substitution cipher, where each letter of the alphabet was replaced by a symbol. Their messages were smuggled to Mary in the hollowed-out bung of a beer barrel. It seemed like a foolproof plan. But Walsingham knew everything. He had a double agent, Gilbert Gifford, working inside the plot. Gifford was the man delivering the beer barrels. But before he delivered them, he took them straight to Walsingham's office. There, the letters were carefully unsealed. Philippes transcribed the coded message, broke the cipher, and wrote out the plain text. A copy was made. Then the original letter was resealed and sent on its way to Mary. The same process happened with her replies. For months, Walsingham read every word exchanged between Mary and the plotters. He was not just watching the plot unfold. He was controlling it. He needed more than just evidence of a plot. He needed proof that Mary herself approved of Elizabeth's assassination. He waited patiently. Finally, the crucial letter arrived. Babington wrote to Mary, detailing the plan to kill Elizabeth. Walsingham and Philippes waited for her reply. It came on July 17th, 1586. In it, Mary gave her blessing to the plot. She approved of the plan to assassinate her cousin. This was the evidence Walsingham needed. Philippes decoded the letter. It was this document on which he drew the little gallows. The trap was sprung. Babington and the other conspirators were arrested, tried, and executed. Mary was put on trial for treason. The intercepted letters, decoded and presented in court, were the undeniable proof of her guilt. She was found guilty, and after much hesitation from Elizabeth, was beheaded in February 1587. The defeat of the Babington plot did more than just remove a rival. It fundamentally changed the political landscape. It eliminated the primary Catholic claimant to the English throne. This solidified Elizabeth's power and the future of Protestantism in England. It also had huge international consequences. The execution of Mary infuriated King Philip II of Spain. He saw it as the final straw. It was a major factor in his decision to launch the Spanish Armada against England the following year. But Walsingham's network was ready for that too. His spies in Spain had been sending back reports for years about the buildup of a massive fleet. They provided details on the number of ships, the types of cannons, and the amount of supplies being loaded. This intelligence gave England crucial time to prepare its own navy. When the Armada finally sailed, the English were not caught by surprise. The information gathered by Elizabeth's Quiet Queens network had given them the edge they needed to defend their island nation. Elizabeth ruled for 44 years, a period of relative stability and great cultural achievement. That long reign was built on a foundation of secrets secured by a spy master who served his queen with absolute loyalty, and a network that saw and heard everything. Number 16, could gossip topple a government? In the 16th century French court, a whisper could be deadlier than a sword. A group of about 20 ladies in waiting, known for their beauty and sharp minds, moved through the halls of the Louvre Palace. They were always near the center of power. They heard everything, and they reported it all back to one person, the Queen Mother, Catherine de Medici. This group was her intelligence service. History remembers them as l'Escadron Volante, or the Flying Squadron. Catherine de Medici was born in Italy and married into the French royal family. She was the wife of one king, Henry II, and the mother of 3 more. For over 30 years, she was the most powerful person in France. She governed a country torn apart by religious wars between Catholics and Protestants, known as Huguenots. Her entire political career was a balancing act, trying to keep the monarchy from collapsing under the weight of civil war. She understood that to control the powerful, ambitious nobles of her court, she needed to know their secrets. Who was plotting with whom? Who was in debt? Who was loyal? Who was planning to betray the crown? Her flying squadron was her primary tool for gathering this information. These women were not spies in the traditional sense. They did not use dead drops or invisible ink. Their methods were far more subtle. They were placed in the inner circles of powerful men. They used their charm, wit, and social connections to build relationships. At a royal ball, a hunt, or a private dinner, they would listen. They would steer conversations. They would gather information piece by piece. A careless word from a duke, after too much wine, a boast from an ambitious courtier, a complaint from a disgruntled general. All of it was collected and delivered to Catherine. It was a brilliant strategy. Men at court would often let their guard down around these women. They underestimated them. They saw them as mere ornaments of the court, not as political operatives. This was a fatal miscalculation. The women of the squadron were intelligent and politically astute. They understood the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined the court. Catherine chose them carefully. They were from noble families, well-educated, and fiercely loyal to her. One famous example of their influence was during the negotiations for the Peace of Saint-Germain-en-Laye in 1570. This was a treaty intended to end the Third War of Religion. The negotiations were tense. The Protestant and Catholic factions deeply distrusted each other, and Catherine used her ladies to soften the hardened positions of the nobles on both sides. They would engage the Protestant leaders in conversation, assuring them of the Queen Mother's goodwill. They would gather intelligence on the sticking points in the negotiations and report back to Catherine, allowing her to adjust her strategy. Their social influence helped to create an atmosphere where a peace treaty was possible. However, the flying squadron was also used for more direct political maneuvering. If a particular nobleman was becoming too powerful or troublesome, Catherine might dispatch one of her ladies to get close to him. The goal was to discover a weakness, a secret that could be used as leverage. This information could be used to blackmail him into compliance or to ruin his reputation, neutralizing him as a political threat without a single soldier having to lift a sword. The squadron's work was central to Catherine's style of government. She preferred negotiation and intrigue over open conflict. War was expensive and destructive. A well-placed piece of information was far cheaper and often more effective. Her control of information allowed her to play the different factions against each other. She could feed information to one side to weaken another. She could expose a plot before it even began. This network was not without its controversies. Catherine's enemies accused her of using the ladies in morally questionable ways, creating a decadent and corrupt court. But for Catherine, the ends justified the means. She was fighting for the survival of her son's throne and for the unity of France. In her view, any tool that helped achieve that was necessary. The intelligence gathered by the flying squadron had a direct impact on major historical events. It influenced marriage negotiations for her children, which were crucial tools of foreign policy. It helped her navigate the treacherous plots of the powerful Guise family, her main Catholic rivals. It gave her advance warning of troop movements and political conspiracies. Catherine de' Medici's reign was a masterclass in political survival. She held France together during one of its most chaotic periods. While her legacy is complex and often debated, her use of a sophisticated female-led intelligence network is undeniable. She turned the social conventions of the court into a weapon. She proved that in the world of high-stakes politics, the most valuable information is often gathered not on the battlefield, but in the ballroom. Her flying squadron showed that a carefully chosen word could be more powerful than an army. Number 15, what if citizens were paid to accuse each other? Imagine a system where anyone could secretly report on their neighbors. In 7th century China, Empress Zetian created just that. She installed copper boxes in the capital city. These boxes had 4 slots, one for men to recommend themselves for government positions, one for citizens to offer advice or criticism of the government, one for people to report on supernatural omens, and one for people to secretly accuse others of treason or corruption. This last slot created a river of information that flowed directly to the Empress. It was the heart of her secret police state. Zetian was the only woman to ever rule China in her own right as emperor. She rose from being a concubine of Emperor Taizong to becoming the wife of his successor, Emperor Gaozong. After his death, she ruled through her sons before eventually deposing them and declaring her own dynasty, the Zhou, in 690. Her path to power was ruthless and brilliant. To hold on to that power in a society that believed a woman could not rule, she needed absolute control. Information was the key to that control. The copper boxes were just the beginning. She established a network of secret police, a force known for its brutal efficiency. Its leader was a man named Lai Junchen. He and his officers became the most feared men in China. They were empowered to investigate, arrest, and question anyone suspected of disloyalty to the Empress. The accusations that came through the copper boxes were their starting point. The system was designed to create an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. No one knew who might be an informer. It could be your friend, your servant, or a member of your own family. People were encouraged to report on each other. Those whose accusations proved true were rewarded with money and official positions. This created a powerful incentive for people to become informants. The result was a flood of accusations, many of them false, designed to settle personal scores or to gain personal advantage. Lai Junchen developed a systematic approach to dealing with suspects. He even wrote a manual called the Manual of Accusation, which detailed how to frame a case and how to get a confession. Once a person was accused, they were considered guilty until proven innocent, which was almost impossible. The secret police had the authority to arrest anyone, no matter how high their rank. Princes, chancellors, and top generals were all brought down by this system. It is estimated that thousands of officials and their families were eliminated during this period. This network was not just about terror. It was a highly effective tool of political control. Zetian used it to systematically remove her opponents. Anyone who questioned her right to rule, who belonged to a rival political faction, or who was a member of the old Li imperial family of the Tang dynasty was a target. By eliminating these threats, she consolidated her power and silenced dissent. The intelligence gathered by the secret police also gave her deep insight into the workings of her government. She learned who was corrupt, who was incompetent, and who was building their own power base. This allowed her to manage her vast bureaucracy with an iron fist. She could promote those who were loyal and capable and discard those who were not. One of the most remarkable aspects of Wu Zetian's rule was that despite the climate of fear, her reign was also a time of relative stability and prosperity for the common people. She was a skilled administrator. She reduced the power of the old aristocracy and promoted scholars and officials based on merit, not birth. She reformed the military and expanded the empire's borders. The information she gathered through her intelligence network, while terrifying for the elite, helped her to maintain order and run the country effectively. The secret police network was eventually dismantled. As Wu Zetian grew older, even she began to see that its power had grown too great. Lai Jinshin himself was eventually accused of treason and executed, a victim of the very system he had created. After Wu Zetian was overthrown in a palace coup in 705, the Tang dynasty was restored. Wu Zetian's legacy is one of China's most controversial. Traditional Confucian historians portrayed her as a cruel and illegitimate ruler, but her methods, however harsh, were undeniably effective. Her secret police and network of informants were a state-sponsored spy ring that she controlled directly. It allowed her, a woman in a man's world, to seize the imperial throne and hold it for 15 years. She understood that to build a new order, you first had to have total knowledge of the old one and the power to dismantle it piece by piece. Her copper boxes stand as a chilling example of how a ruler can turn the populace into a vast intelligence gathering network. Number 14, how do you run a kingdom from behind a silk screen? For nearly 50 years, the most powerful person in China was a woman who never officially held the top title. Empress Dowager Cixi ruled from behind the curtain. She was the regent for two young emperors, her son and then her nephew. But in reality, she was the one making the decisions. To maintain her grip on the vast and crumbling Qing dynasty in the late 19th century, she relied on a complex and informal intelligence network composed of court eunuchs. Cixi entered the Forbidden City as a low-ranking concubine in the 1850s. She was intelligent and ambitious. She caught the attention of the emperor and gave birth to his only son. When the emperor died in 1861, her 5-year-old son became emperor. This made her the Empress Dowager and co-regent. From that moment on, she was at the center of Chinese politics. The Forbidden City was a world of its own, with thousands of inhabitants. It was a maze of protocols, rituals, and deadly political rivalries. Information was the currency of this world. Cixi, confined by tradition to the inner palaces, needed eyes and ears everywhere. She found them in the thousands of eunuchs who served the imperial court. Eunuchs were the only adult males allowed to live in the private quarters of the Forbidden City. They served the imperial family in every capacity, from the most menial tasks to the highest administrative positions. They were everywhere. They served tea, delivered messages, managed household accounts, and stood guard outside doors. They saw and heard everything, and because their entire lives and careers depended on the favor of the imperial family, many were intensely loyal to the person at the top. For Cixi, this was a ready-made spy network. She cultivated relationships with key eunuchs. Her favorite and most powerful was Li Lianying. He became her Grand Chief Eunuch and her closest confidant for decades. He was her spy master. Through him, Cixi controlled a network that extended throughout the Forbidden City and into the government ministries in the capital. The system was informal but effective. Eunuchs would report on the conversations of government officials visiting the palace. They would listen for gossip about which officials were forming alliances or complaining about imperial policy. They could intercept documents or report on who was meeting with whom. Li Lianying would filter this information and present it to Cixi. This gave her an enormous advantage. Before she even met with her grand counselors, she often already knew their positions, their arguments, and their secret disagreements with each other. This network was crucial for Cixi to outmaneuver her political rivals. Early in her regency, she had to contend with a group of powerful ministers appointed by her late husband. They saw her as a threat and tried to sideline her. Using her eunuch network, she gathered intelligence on their plans. She learned of their conspiracy to seize power. In a swift and decisive move, she had them arrested and executed, securing her position as the undisputed ruler of China. Cixi's intelligence gathering was not just about court intrigue, it was also about national policy. She used her network to get unfiltered information about what was happening in the provinces. Official reports from governors were often censored or overly optimistic. Cixi's eunuchs could talk to lower-level officials or visitors from the provinces, giving her a more realistic picture of the country's problems, such as famine, rebellion, or the encroachment of foreign powers. This system was not without its problems. It led to a great deal of corruption. Powerful eunuchs like Li Lianying could use their access to the Empress to enrich themselves. They could sell government positions or influence policy for a price. They could also use the intelligence network to destroy their own enemies, feeding Cixi false or biased information. This palace system of intelligence often created a barrier between the Empress and her most capable government officials who resented the power of the eunuchs. As China faced increasing pressure from Western nations and Japan in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the limitations of Cixi's informal spy ring became apparent. It was excellent at managing internal court politics, but it was not equipped to gather intelligence on modern armies, industrial economies, or international diplomacy. The information Cixi received was often colored by the conservative, insular worldview of the court. This contributed to some of the disastrous decisions made during this period, such as the support for the Boxer Uprising. Despite its flaws, Cixi's network of eunuch spies was the key to her long and powerful reign. For half a century, she navigated the treacherous waters of the Chinese court, playing factions against each other and eliminating threats before they could grow. She ruled a vast empire not from a throne in a public hall, but from a private room. Her power projected through a web of secrets and whispers carried by the silent servants who moved through the palace corridors. Her story shows how, even in a system designed to isolate a woman from power, a shrewd leader can create a formidable intelligence network from the most unlikely of sources. Year number 13, could a queen's kindness be a weapon of war? During World War I, Brussels was under German occupation. The Belgian royal family had been forced to flee, but one member chose to stay behind. Queen Elizabeth, wife of King Albert I, remained in the small, unoccupied part of Belgium, right behind the front lines. From her residence in the town of Dieppe, she became the heart of the Belgian resistance. She did not command armies, but she ran a different kind of war. It was a war of medicine, morale, and information. Her hospital was her headquarters, and her network of nurses and doctors were agents. Elizabeth was born a duchess in Bavaria, Germany. She married Albert, the heir to the Belgian throne, in 1900. When war broke out in 1914 and Germany invaded neutral Belgium, she did not hesitate. Despite her German heritage, her loyalty was completely with her new country. While King Albert commanded the army from the front, Elizabeth created a new role for herself. She was a trained nurse, and she turned the royal palace in Brussels into a hospital before the city fell. After moving to Dieppe, she established the Lotion Hospital. It was a state-of-the-art facility just a few kilometers from the trenches. But it was much more than just a place to treat the wounded. It became a central hub for the Belgian intelligence network. The network was informal but highly effective. It relied on the movement of people and information across the heavily fortified border between occupied and unoccupied Belgium. The key players were doctors, nurses, priests, and local citizens. They used their positions as cover to gather and transmit vital information. Nurses working with the Red Cross were able to cross the lines with a certain degree of freedom. They carried more than just medical supplies. They smuggled messages, maps of German troop positions, and reports on military activities. A note could be hidden in a bandage, a hollowed-out book, or the sole of a shoe. Queen Elizabeth was the central figure who received much of this information. She had the connections and the authority to ensure it reached the Belgian and Allied military commanders. The hospital itself was a prime spot for intelligence gathering. Wounded soldiers brought back from the front lines could provide first-hand accounts of enemy strength and tactics. Civilians escaping from occupied territory often had valuable information about conditions behind enemy lines. Elizabeth and her trusted staff would debrief these individuals, piecing together a picture of the German war machine. She also used her royal connections across Europe to her advantage. She was related to many of the royal families, including the German Kaiser. She used these channels to send messages and to advocate for the Belgian people. She was a powerful symbol of resistance, and her personal correspondence was a form of diplomatic and intelligence work. One of the most famous intelligence circuits that she supported was the Dame Blanche White Lady Network. This was one of the largest and most successful Allied spy rings of the war, operating primarily in occupied Belgium and northern France. It provided a constant stream of intelligence about German troop movements. The information was often relayed by train spotters who would record the numbers on German train cars, which could be used to identify specific military units and their destinations. While Elizabeth did not run the Dame Blanche directly, she was a key supporter and a high-level recipient of its intelligence. She provided funding and used her influence to protect its members when possible. Elizabeth's work was incredibly dangerous. The German occupation forces were ruthless in dealing with spies and resistance fighters. Many of the brave men and women in these networks were caught and executed. Elizabeth herself was in constant danger, living so close to the front lines. Her hospital was even shelled on occasion. But her bravery was a source of immense inspiration for the Belgian people and the soldiers in the trenches. She was not a distant monarch. She was on the ground, sharing their risks and working tirelessly for their cause. Her spy ring was not one of professionals with code books and secret gadgets. It was a network built on trust, patriotism, and a shared desire for freedom. It was powered by ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Queen Elizabeth showed that intelligence work is not always about secret agents and clandestine meetings. It can also be about creating a center of gravity, a place where information naturally flows. Her hospital was a place of healing, but it was also a listening post on the front line of a world war. She used her status and compassion as tools to gather information that helped her country survive its darkest hour. Number 12, how did a Polish queen win a war without fighting? In the late 14th century, a teenage girl became the ruler of Poland. Her name was Jadwiga. She was not just a queen, she was crowned king of Poland to signify that she was a ruler in her own right, not just a king's wife. She faced a formidable threat to the north, the Teutonic Knights. This powerful military order was constantly at war with Poland's neighbor, Lithuania. Jadwiga knew that a direct military confrontation would be devastating, so she chose a different path. She used diplomacy, negotiation, and a sophisticated network of envoys and informants to neutralize the threat and reshape the map of Eastern Europe. Jadwiga ascended to the throne in 1384 at the age of 10. The Polish nobles had chosen her, but they also chose her husband Jogaila, the Grand Duke of Lithuania. At the time, Lithuania was the last pagan state in Europe. The Teutonic Knights used this as a pretext to wage a perpetual crusade against them seizing their lands. The marriage of Jadwiga and Jogaila was a strategic masterstroke. It created the Polish-Lithuanian Union, a massive new power in the region. Jogaila converted to Christianity, removing the Knights' primary justification for war. But the Teutonic Knights were not going to give up their ambitions easily. They continued to raid and provoke their newly united neighbors. This is where Jadwiga's intelligence network came into play. She did not have a formal spy agency like Walsingham's. Her network was a diplomatic one, but it served the same purpose. Her agents were diplomats, friars, merchants, and scholars. She sent them on missions to the major power centers of Europe. Their primary destination was the papal court in Rome. The Pope was the only authority that the Teutonic Knights truly answered to. Jadwiga's envoys began a long and patient campaign to expose the Knights' true nature to the rest of Christendom. These were not just diplomatic visits. They were intelligence operations. Her envoys gathered information on the political situation at the papal court. They learned which cardinals were sympathetic to the knights and which were not. They presented evidence of the knights' brutal actions, not just against pagan Lithuanians, but also against Christian Poles. They carried letters, legal documents, and witness testimonies. They were essentially building a legal case against the military order on the international stage. Jadwiga herself was the center of this web. She was highly educated, fluent in 5 languages. She personally wrote many of the letters to the Pope and other European rulers. She directed her envoys, telling them what information to gather and what arguments to make. She also had informants within the territories controlled by the knights. Local priests and merchants would send her secret messages about the knights' activities, their troop strengths, and their plans. One of the key successes of her information campaign was in framing the narrative. The Teutonic Knights had a powerful propaganda machine. They portrayed themselves as holy warriors defending Christendom. Jadwiga's network systematically dismantled this image. Her envoys argued that the knights were more interested in conquest and wealth than in converting pagans. They pointed out that Poland and Lithuania were now a unified Christian state, and the knights' continued aggression was an attack on fellow Christians. This campaign had a direct impact. It began to turn European public opinion against the knights. The flow of donations and new recruits from Western Europe, which the knights relied on, began to slow down. The Pope began to rule against them in territorial disputes with Poland and Lithuania. Jadwiga was winning the information war. She also used her intelligence to conduct masterful negotiations directly with the knights. She met with the Grand Master of the Order herself on several occasions. These were tense standoffs, but Jadwiga came to the table prepared, armed with detailed information from her network about the knights' weaknesses, their internal political divisions, and the shifting mood in Rome. She was able to negotiate from a position of strength. She secured the return of captured territories and forced the knights to sign peace treaties. Jadwiga's reign was tragically short. She died in 1399 at the age of 25, but her work laid the foundation for the ultimate defeat of the Teutonic Knights. The Polish-Lithuanian Union she had helped create continued to grow in strength. The information and diplomatic groundwork she had laid isolated the knights politically. A decade after her death, in 1410, the combined forces of Poland and Lithuania decisively defeated the Teutonic Knights at the Battle of Grunwald. It was one of the largest battles of medieval Europe, and it shattered the power of the Order for good. That victory was won with swords and lances. But the seeds of that victory were planted years earlier by a young queen who understood that wars are not just won on the battlefield. They are also won in the corridors of power, in the minds of distant rulers, and with the patient, relentless gathering and deployment of information. Jadwiga's spying was not one of shadows and daggers, but of diplomacy and documents. It changed the course of history for her nation. Number 11, could an empress start a war to save a prince? In the mid-18th century, Empress Maria Theresa of Austria faced a crisis. Her great rival, King Frederick the Great of Prussia, had seized the rich province of Silesia. Maria Theresa was determined to get it back. To do this, she needed to break Prussia's alliance with France. She embarked on a decade-long diplomatic and intelligence campaign that would flip the alliance system of Europe on its head and lead to the 7 Years' War. At the heart of this campaign was her trusted advisor and spy master, Prince Wenzel Anton von Kaunitz. Maria Theresa was the ruler of the vast Habsburg monarchy. She came to the throne in 1740, and her reign was immediately challenged in the War of the Austrian Succession. It was during this war that she lost Silesia to Prussia. She never accepted this loss. For the next 8 years of peace, her entire foreign policy was geared towards one goal: isolating Prussia and reclaiming her lost territory. The traditional alliance system in Europe pitted Austria and Great Britain against France and Prussia. Maria Theresa and Kaunitz realized that this system was no longer working for Austria. Britain was more concerned with its overseas colonial rivalry with France than with helping Austria reclaim Silesia. The only way to defeat Prussia was to get France on their side. This seemed impossible. France and the Habsburgs had been bitter enemies for over 200 years. This is where the intelligence work began. Kaunitz was sent as the ambassador to Paris. His job was not just to be a diplomat. It was to be a master spy. He was tasked with building a pro-Austrian faction within the French court at Versailles. He needed to understand the complex power dynamics, the personal rivalries, and the secret desires of the French elite. Kaunitz created a network of informants. He hosted lavish parties where he could listen to the gossip and political talk. He used secret funds provided by Maria Theresa to bribe officials and courtiers. He identified the key influencers. He realized that King Louis XV of France was heavily influenced by his official mistress, Madame de Pompadour. Traditional diplomacy would have ignored her, but Kaunitz knew she was the key. He began to secretly communicate with her. This was a delicate operation. He used intermediaries and coded messages. He and Maria Theresa worked to convince her that Prussia, not Austria, was the real threat to France. They argued that Frederick the Great was an unreliable and arrogant ally who would betray France when it suited him. Meanwhile, an alliance with a stable and powerful Austria could bring great benefits. Maria Theresa, the powerful Empress, even humbled herself to write personal, friendly letters to Madame de Pompadour, a woman of common birth. This was a shocking break with royal protocol, but it was a calculated move in a high-stakes intelligence game. While Kaunitz worked his magic in Paris, Maria Theresa was reforming her own intelligence services. She established the Geheimkabinettskanzlei Secret Cabinet Chancellery. This was a centralized agency responsible for foreign intelligence and code breaking. It intercepted the diplomatic mail of other countries, decoded it, and provided Maria Theresa with a constant stream of secret information. This allowed her to know what her rivals and potential allies were thinking. She could read the secret instructions sent to French and British ambassadors. This gave her a huge advantage in negotiations. By 1756, the work of Maria Theresa and Kaunitz paid off. They had successfully turned France against Prussia. They uncovered secret negotiations between Prussia and Great Britain, which proved to the French that Frederick was indeed an untrustworthy ally. The diplomatic revolution was complete. France signed a defensive alliance with its old enemy, Austria. This dramatic reversal of alliances changed the balance of power in Europe. When Frederick the Great launched a preemptive strike against Austria's ally Saxony in 1756, he found himself facing a massive coalition. Austria, France, and Russia were all allied against him. The 7 Years' War had begun. Maria Theresa did not win the war in the end. After 7 years of brutal fighting, Silesia remained in Prussian hands. But her intelligence operation had been a spectacular success. She had used a combination of traditional diplomacy, secret agents, bribery, and personal charm to completely re-engineer the political landscape of Europe. She had isolated her primary enemy and forged an alliance that would have been unthinkable just a decade earlier. Her reign showed the power of a centralized, monarch-led intelligence strategy. She was not a distant ruler who simply received reports. She was actively involved, reading decoded intercepts, writing secret letters, and directing her spy master. She understood that to change the world, you first had to understand its secrets. Her quiet war of information, waged in the salons of Paris and the decoding rooms of Vienna, set the stage for one of the largest conflicts of the 18th century. Number 10, did a queen's revenge create a nation? In the 10th century, the land that would become Russia was a collection of Slavic tribes ruled by a Viking elite known as the Russes. The ruler of Kiev, Prince Igor, was assassinated by a tribe called the Drevlians after demanding excessive tribute. His wife, Olga, was left as regent for their young son, Sviatoslav. The Drevlians thought she was just a grieving widow who could be easily pushed aside. They sent ambassadors to Kiev to propose that Olga marry their prince Mao. It was a massive underestimation. What followed was not a negotiation, but a series of brilliant, cold-blooded acts of psychological warfare and deception, all orchestrated by Olga. She used information and trickery to destroy her enemies and consolidate the power of Kiev. When the Drevlian ambassadors arrived in Kiev by boat, Olga greeted them with a seemingly generous offer. She told them to wait in their boat, and that the next day her people would carry them in the boat to her court, a great honor. The Drevlians, proud and arrogant, agreed. The next day, the people of Kiev carried the boat with the ambassadors in it. But they did not carry it to the palace. They carried it to a deep trench that had been dug overnight in the castle courtyard. And they threw the boat and the ambassadors into the trench and buried them alive. This was her first act of revenge. It was also a masterclass in information control. She had eliminated the enemy's leadership without a single witness escaping to tell the tale. Olga then sent a message back to the Drevlians. She told them she had accepted their proposal, but that she required their most distinguished men to accompany her back to their capital to be properly honored. The Drevlians, unaware of the fate of their first delegation, were flattered. They gathered their best governors and chieftains and sent them to Kiev. When this second delegation arrived, Olga ordered a bathhouse to be prepared for them so they could wash after their long journey. Once the Drevlian nobles were inside the bathhouse, Olga's men bolted the doors from the outside and set it on fire. All of them perished. Again, the operation was swift and secret. The Drevlians still did not know what was happening. Olga then launched her third deception. She traveled to the Drevlian lands with a small retinue. She told them she wanted to hold a funeral feast at the burial mound of her husband, Igor, near their capital of Iskorostan. The Drevlians, perhaps now suspicious but still not comprehending the scale of Olga's plan, agreed. At the feast, Olga's attendants served the Drevlians vast quantities of mead. When the Drevlians were completely drunk and incapacitated, Olga gave a signal. Her soldiers, who had been hiding nearby, fell upon them and killed a reported 5,000 men. The final act was the siege of Iskorostan. The city held out for a year. Olga could not take it by force. So she resorted to one last, ingenious piece of psychological warfare. She sent a message to the city, saying she had avenged her husband enough. She offered them peace in exchange for a small tribute. She did not ask for gold or furs. She asked for 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house. The starving and exhausted citizens of Iskorostan were overjoyed. They gladly collected the birds and sent them out to Olga. They thought the war was over, but Olga had one more plan. She instructed her soldiers to attach a piece of sulfur bound with small pieces of cloth to each bird's leg. At nightfall, they lit the sulfur and released the birds. The birds flew back to their nests in the eaves, coops, and thatch roofs of the wooden city. Iskorostan was instantly engulfed in flames. As the terrified people fled the burning city, Olga's army was waiting for them. The city was destroyed, and the Drevlian tribe was broken forever. Olga's revenge was not just a series of brutal acts. It was a calculated campaign based on superior intelligence and a deep understanding of her enemy's psychology. She knew they were arrogant and would fall for her flattery. She controlled the flow of information perfectly, ensuring that the Drevlians never understood what was happening until it was too late. Each step of her plan was designed to eliminate the enemy's leadership and military capability piece by piece. After this, no other tribe dared to challenge the authority of Kiev. Olga's actions solidified the power of the Ruses and laid the groundwork for the creation of the first East Slavic state, Kievan Ruses. She went on to be a capable ruler, reforming the system of tribute gathering so that it was systematic and fair, preventing future conflicts like the one that killed her husband. She later converted to Christianity and became a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Her story, as told in the ancient chronicles, is a stark example of how deception and information control can be as powerful as any army. She was a queen who ran a spy ring of one herself. Her mind was her greatest weapon, and with it she carved out a kingdom from a landscape of chaos and tribal warfare. Number 9. Did a Roman empress build her own secret service? In the 6th century, the Byzantine Empire was ruled by one of its most famous couples, Emperor Justinian and Empress Theodora. Justinian was the great lawgiver and conqueror, but Theodora was the power behind the throne. She came from a humble background, the daughter of a bear keeper for the Hippodrome Circus. She had been an actress, a profession considered scandalous at the time. This background, however, gave her a unique set of skills. She understood the common people, she knew how to read others, and she knew that information gathered secretly was the key to survival and power. She built her own network of spies and informants, separate from the official state apparatus, which she used to protect her husband, eliminate her rivals, and shape the policies of the empire. Theodora's intelligence network was centered on the imperial palace in Constantinople. Like Cixi in China, she used the vast staff of the palace as her eyes and ears. Her ladies in waiting, eunuchs, and servants were fiercely loyal to her. She had lifted them up, and they knew their fortunes were tied to hers. They reported to her on the daily comings and goings of the court. They listened to the conversations of generals, senators, and visiting dignitaries. But her network extended far beyond the palace walls. She had agents throughout the sprawling city of Constantinople. The city was famous for its political factions, often linked to the chariot racing teams of the Blues and the Greens. These factions could erupt into violent riots that threatened the stability of the throne. Theodora, who had grown up in this world, understood it intimately. She had informants within all the factions. They kept her aware of the public mood, the latest political rumors, and any signs of impending unrest. This proved crucial during the Nika riots of 532. A dispute at the chariot races exploded into a full-scale insurrection against Justinian's rule. Much of the city was burned. The senators, who resented Justinian's power, saw their chance and declared a new emperor. Justinian's generals advised him to flee the capital. His nerve was breaking. He was ready to board a ship and escape. It was Theodora who saved the throne. In a famous speech to the imperial council, she refused to run. She argued that it was better to die a ruler than to live as an exile. Her courage shamed the men into action. But it was not just a brave speech. It was a calculated risk based on intelligence. Her network had likely informed her that the rebellion was not as unified as it appeared. And the Blues and the Greens, who had temporarily united, still hated each other. She knew there were divisions that could be exploited. While the general Belisarius took the army to the Hippodrome to deal with the rioters, Theodora's agents were likely at work behind the scenes, spreading rumors, offering bribes, and working to break the fragile alliance between the rebel factions. The revolt was crushed, Justinian's throne was secure, and everyone in Constantinople knew that it was the Empress, not the Emperor, who had saved the day. Theodora also used her spy network to influence religious policy. The empire was torn by a complex theological dispute over the nature of Christ. Theodora sympathized with the Monophysite faction, which had been declared heretical. She used her agents to protect Monophysite priests and bishops from persecution. She had a secret network of monasteries and safe houses where they could hide. She would receive secret information about impending arrests and warn them in advance. At one point, she even had the Orthodox Pope Vigilius effectively kidnapped and brought to Constantinople to force him to be more accommodating to her views. This was a stunning use of covert action to achieve a political and religious goal. Her network also served as a private security force. She had her own guards and agents who were loyal only to her. She used them to investigate potential plots against the throne. Procopius, a historian who was deeply hostile to Theodora, wrote stories of her secret dungeons and her network of informers who could make people disappear. While his accounts are likely exaggerated, they speak to the reputation she had for being a ruthless and effective operator in the shadows. Theodora's spy ring was not an official government agency. It was a personal network, built on loyalty and a shared understanding of the precarious nature of power. She was a full partner in Justinian's rule, and her intelligence operations were a key part of their joint success. She protected the throne from internal enemies, navigated the treacherous waters of religious controversy, and helped her husband preside over a golden age of the Byzantine Empire. Her story is a powerful example of a queen who came from nothing and used the skills she learned on the streets to build an intelligence network that could rival any official state service. Number 8. What if a queen's trade routes were really spy routes? In the 15th century BC, Egypt was ruled by one of the most successful pharaohs in its history. This pharaoh commissioned magnificent building projects, oversaw a period of great prosperity, and launched a legendary trading expedition to a distant land called Punt. The pharaoh's name was Hatshepsut, and she was a woman. To hold on to power in a patriarchal society and to manage her vast kingdom, Hatshepsut needed more than just the authority of a pharaoh. She needed information. Her great trading expeditions were not just about commerce, they were sophisticated intelligence-gathering missions that helped secure her reign and project Egyptian power. Hatshepsut was the wife of Pharaoh Thutmose II. When he died, her stepson, Thutmose III, was just a small child. She began as his regent, but within a few years she had taken the unprecedented step of having herself crowned pharaoh. She ruled for over 20 years, and her reign was one of peace and prosperity. She focused on building projects and reestablishing trade networks that had been disrupted by previous wars. Her most famous achievement was the expedition to the land of Punt. The exact location of Punt is still debated by historians, but it was likely somewhere on the coast of modern-day Eritrea, Somalia, or Sudan. It was a source of exotic goods that were highly prized by the Egyptians: incense, myrrh, ebony, gold, and wild animals. The story of the expedition is famously carved on the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. The carvings depict a large fleet of 5 ships, each about 70 feet long, setting sail down the Nile and into the Red Sea. This was a major state-sponsored enterprise. It required incredible logistical planning, but it was more than just a shopping trip. It was an act of foreign policy and intelligence gathering. The men on these ships were not just sailors and traders. They were also, in effect, spies. Their mission was to map the coastlines, identify safe harbors, and make contact with local rulers. They were to gather information about the political situation in these distant lands. Who was in charge? What were their military capabilities? What resources did they have? This was vital information for Egypt. It allowed them to understand the world beyond their borders, to identify potential threats, and to find new opportunities for trade and influence. The expedition to Punt was a stunning success. The ships returned laden with treasures. The carvings showed the Egyptians loading myrrh trees, which were to be transplanted in Egypt, a remarkable botanical achievement. They brought back incense, ivory, and exotic animals like monkeys and giraffes. The return of the expedition was a massive propaganda victory for Hatshepsut. It showed her people that she could deliver prosperity and that she had the divine favor of the gods. But the real value may have been the information. This and other expeditions helped Hatshepsut to build a detailed picture of the political and economic landscape of the Red Sea and northeastern Africa. This knowledge was power. It allowed Egypt to control the trade routes and to manage its relationships with its southern neighbors from a position of strength. Hatshepsut's intelligence network was not one of secret agents in the modern sense. It was integrated into the commercial and diplomatic activities of the state. Every trading caravan that went out, every diplomatic envoy sent to a foreign court had a dual purpose. They were there to trade or negotiate, but they were also there to observe and report. This was particularly important for Hatshepsut's internal security. As a female pharaoh, her position was not entirely secure. There were factions within the court that supported her stepson, Thutmose III. She needed to maintain an image of a successful and effective ruler. The prosperity generated by her trade routes and the prestige brought back from expeditions like the one to Punt helped to solidify her grip on power. Her control of information about the outside world also made her indispensable. Hatshepsut's reign shows an early and sophisticated understanding of how commercial and state power are intertwined. Her ships sailed under the flag of trade, but they carried the mission of intelligence. She used the pursuit of wealth as a cover for the gathering of knowledge. This knowledge helped her to rule effectively for 2 decades, ushering in an era of peace and architectural splendor. She proved that aspiring does not always need daggers and secrets sometimes. It can be a fleet of ships, laden with goods, mapping the known world and bringing its secrets home to their queen. Number 7. How did a Syrian queen challenge the might of Rome? In the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire was in a state of constant crisis. In the east, a new power was rising. From the oasis city of Palmyra, in modern-day Syria, Queen Zenobia built an empire that stretched from Egypt to Turkey. She challenged the authority of Rome itself. To do this, to manage her rapid conquests, and to anticipate the moves of the mighty Roman legions, she relied on a vast and efficient intelligence network that utilized the desert trade routes. Zenobia was the wife of Odenathus, the ruler of Palmyra. Palmyra was a wealthy city-state that had grown rich from its position on the trade routes connecting the Roman Empire with Persia and the East. After Odenathus was assassinated, Zenobia became regent for their young son. But she was no mere placeholder. She was ambitious, intelligent, and a brilliant military strategist. She decided to break away from Roman control and create her own Eastern Empire. Her spy network was built on the foundations of Palmyra's commercial empire. For centuries, Palmyrene merchants had run camel caravans across the vast deserts of the Middle East. These caravans were not just lines of camels carrying silk and spices. They were conduits of information. The merchants and caravan leaders who crisscrossed the region were Zenobia's eyes and ears. They brought her news from every corner of the East. They reported on the strength of Roman garrisons in different cities. They told her about the political situation in Roman Egypt, a province ripe for takeover. They gathered intelligence on the local tribes and their loyalties. This information allowed Zenobia to plan her military campaigns with remarkable precision. When she launched her invasion of Egypt in 270 AD, it was not a blind gamble. Her agents had already informed her that the Roman governor was weak and that much of the Roman army was away fighting Goths in Europe. She knew exactly when and where to strike. Her army, led by her general Zabdas, swiftly conquered the rich province, the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Zenobia's intelligence network was also crucial for governing her new empire. She needed to know what was happening in the far-flung cities under her control. Her merchant spies kept her informed about any signs of unrest or disloyalty. She used a system of fast camel-mounted messengers, the dromedari, to transmit reports and orders quickly across the desert. This allowed her to respond to problems before they could escalate. She was also a master of propaganda, another form of information warfare. She portrayed herself as a successor to Cleopatra and the ancient Hellenistic kings. Her court in Palmyra became a great center of learning and culture. This helped to win the support of the diverse populations of her empire, which included Syrians, Arabs, Greeks, and Egyptians. For a few years, Zenobia's empire was a spectacular success. She controlled some of Rome's most valuable territories. But she had made a powerful enemy. The new Roman Emperor Aurelian was a tough and determined soldier. He turned his attention east, determined to crush the breakaway Palmyrene Empire. Here, the intelligence war intensified. Zenobia's agents tracked Aurelian's army as it marched east. They reported on his numbers and his route. Zenobia tried to use diplomacy and negotiation, but Aurelian was not interested. He defeated her armies in 2 major battles in Turkey. Zenobia was forced to retreat back to her capital, Palmyra. Aurelian laid siege to the city. Zenobia, hoping to escape and rally support from the Persians, made a daring nighttime ride out of the city on a fast camel. But Roman intelligence was good too. Aurelian had been informed of her plan. His cavalry intercepted her as she was about to cross the Euphrates River. She was captured with their queen prisoner. The city of Palmyra surrendered. Zenobia was taken back to Rome and paraded in Aurelian's triumphal procession. Her empire, which had burned so brightly for a few years, was extinguished, but her story is a remarkable one. She was a queen who rose from a desert city to challenge the most powerful empire in the world. Her success was built not just on military might, but on a deep understanding of the importance of information. Her spying was the web of caravan routes that crisscrossed the desert, and the merchants who traveled them were the agents who for a time helped her build an empire. Number 6. Could a queen's death wish save her dynasty? And Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine was one of the most powerful women of the Middle Ages. She was Queen of France, then Queen of England, and the mother of 2 English kings, Richard the Lionheart and John. Her life was long and turbulent, filled with political intrigue, crusades, and rebellions against her own husband. In her later years, as an elderly dowager queen, she undertook her most important mission, securing the throne for her sons and saving the Angevin Empire. To do this, she operated a sophisticated intelligence network that relied on her vast family connections and her deep understanding of the politics of Europe. Eleanor was the Duchess of the vast and wealthy province of Aquitaine in France. Her first marriage was to King Louis VII of France. It was an unhappy one, and they had it annulled. Just weeks later, she married Henry, Duke of Normandy, who soon became King Henry II of England. Together, they ruled a massive collection of lands that stretched from the border of Scotland to the Pyrenees Mountains. Her relationship with Henry was stormy. She supported her sons in a great revolt against their father in 1173. The revolt failed, and Henry had Eleanor imprisoned. She remained his prisoner for 16 years until his death in 1189. She was finally released. She was in her late 60s. Many would have retired, but Eleanor's most active political period was just beginning. Her favorite son, Richard the Lionheart, became king. But he soon left on the Third Crusade. He left the running of his vast empire in the hands of his chancellors, but the real power behind the throne was his mother, Eleanor. She was his regent in all but name, and she immediately had to deal with a host of threats. Richard's younger brother, John, was plotting to seize the throne. The King of France, Philip Augustus, was constantly scheming to take back the French lands held by the English crown. Eleanor's intelligence network was her primary weapon. It was not a formal agency, but a web of personal and political connections that she had cultivated over a lifetime. Her children and grandchildren were married into the royal houses of Castile, Sicily, and the Holy Roman Empire. Her network consisted of her relatives, loyal nobles from her own lands in Aquitaine, and a vast network of clergy and monks. The monastic orders, in particular, were an invaluable source of information. Monks traveled frequently between monasteries across Europe. They carried letters and news. Because they were men of the church, they could often travel more freely and with less suspicion than royal messengers. Eleanor had strong relationships with several powerful abbots and bishops. She used this clerical network to send and receive secret messages and to gather intelligence on the plans of her enemies. A major crisis occurred when Richard, returning from the crusade, was captured and held for ransom by the Duke of Austria. This was a disaster. John and King Philip immediately made their move, plotting to divide Richard's empire between them. Eleanor sprang into action. She used her network to locate where Richard was being held. This was a closely guarded secret, but her agents, likely monks or merchants, eventually found him. She then began a massive diplomatic and fundraising campaign to raise the enormous ransom of 150,000 marks. At the same time, she had to run the government and counter the plots of John and Philip. Her agents in France kept her informed of Philip's military movements. Her informants in England reported on John's attempts to raise a rebellion. She was the central hub, receiving intelligence from all corners of the empire and issuing orders. She traveled tirelessly throughout England, shoring up support for Richard and ensuring the loyalty of the powerful barons. She managed to raise the ransom, a testament to her administrative skills and the reach of her influence. Richard was finally released in 1194. Even after Richard's return, Eleanor remained a key political player. After Richard died and her least favorite son, John, became king, she continued to work to hold the empire together. In 1200, when she was nearly 80 years old, she undertook an arduous journey across the Pyrenees Mountains to the Kingdom of Castile. Her mission was to choose one of her granddaughters to marry the heir to the French throne. This was a crucial diplomatic move designed to secure a peace treaty with France. She successfully completed the mission, escorting her granddaughter Blanche back to France. Eleanor of Aquitaine was a true political survivor. For over 60 years, she was at the center of European politics. Her longevity and her vast network of contacts gave her an unparalleled understanding of the political landscape. She was a queen who ran her intelligence operations not from a secret office, but from her own court, using the threads of family, feudal loyalty, and religious connection to weave a web of information that protected her family's legacy and held an empire together. Number 5, did a queen use the Inquisition as a spy agency? In the late 15th century, Spain was forged into a single nation by the marriage of two powerful monarchs, Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. They are famous for completing the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to reclaim Spain from the Moorish kingdoms, and for funding the voyage of Christopher Columbus. But they also established one of the most feared institutions in European history, the Spanish Inquisition. While its stated purpose was to enforce religious orthodoxy, Isabella also used the Inquisition as a powerful, state-controlled intelligence agency to consolidate her power, eliminate political rivals, and create a unified Spanish identity. When Isabella came to the throne of Castile in 1474, her kingdom was weak and divided. The powerful nobles often acted like independent kings, defying royal authority. There were also deep social and religious divisions. Spain had large populations of Muslims, Mujars, and Jews. Many Jews had converted to Christianity and were known as conversos. Isabella believed that to make Spain strong, it needed to be unified under a single faith, Catholicism. She and Ferdinand petitioned the Pope for permission to establish their own Inquisition, one that would be controlled by the Spanish crown, not by Rome. In 1478, their request was granted. The Spanish Inquisition was a terrifyingly efficient organization. It had tribunals in every major city. It had a network of officials, investigators, and familiars, lay people who acted as informants. This created a vast nationwide intelligence gathering network. The inquisitors had the power to investigate, arrest, and question anyone. Its official targets were heretics, primarily conversos, who were suspected of secretly practicing Judaism. But the definition of heresy could be very broad. It could easily be expanded to include political dissent. Anyone who opposed the Queen's policies could be accused of heresy. This made the Inquisition a formidable political weapon. Isabella was the ultimate authority over the Inquisition. She appointed the Inquisitor General, the infamous Tomás de Torquemada. She received regular reports on its activities. The information that flowed into the Inquisition's offices gave her an unprecedented view into the lives and thoughts of her subjects. The network of familiars was particularly effective. These were people from all walks of life who were granted special privileges in exchange for reporting suspicious activities to the Inquisition. You know, your neighbor, your business partner, or even a family member could be an informant. This created a climate of fear where people were afraid to speak their minds, even in private. It was a highly effective method of social and political control. The Inquisition was used to break the power of the rebellious nobles. A powerful duke who challenged Isabella's authority might find himself or his key supporters being investigated for heresy. The threat of an investigation was often enough to bring a rebellious aristocrat into line. The Inquisition could also confiscate the property of those it condemned. This brought vast sums of money into the royal treasury, which helped to fund the Queen's armies and projects, making the crown less dependent on the nobles. The intelligence gathered by the Inquisition was also used in the war against the last remaining Moorish kingdom, Granada. Inquisitors would question prisoners of war and suspected collaborators gathering military intelligence. The fear of the Inquisition was also used as a psychological weapon to demoralize the enemy. The system was brutal and relentless. They relied on secret accusations. The accused were not told who had accused them. They were held in secret prisons and encouraged to confess. The trials were secret. The Inquisition created a massive archive of information with detailed records on thousands of individuals and families. This archive was a powerful tool for social control. If you or a member of your family had been investigated by the Inquisition, it could be used against you for generations. Isabella's use of the Inquisition as an intelligence service was a key factor in her success. It allowed her to crush political dissent, to break the power of the feudal nobility, and to create a centralized, powerful monarchy. It was instrumental in her project of creating a unified Catholic Spain. This came at a terrible human cost. Thousands of people were persecuted. In 1492, the same year that Granada fell and Columbus sailed, Isabella and Ferdinand issued the Alhambra Decree, ordering all Jews to either convert to Christianity or leave Spain. It was the culmination of a policy of religious intolerance that the Inquisition had helped to enforce. Isabella was a deeply religious woman, and she likely believed she was doing God's work. But she was also a shrewd and pragmatic ruler. She understood that an organization that could look into the souls of her subjects could also be used to control their actions. The Spanish Inquisition was her secret service, a network of spies cloaked in the robes of religious authority, and it helped her to transform a collection of medieval kingdoms into one of the most powerful nations in Europe. Number 4, did a Russian empress have spies in every village? Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia in the late 18th century, was a master of image and power. She corresponded with the great philosophers of the Enlightenment and cultivated a reputation as a progressive and enlightened monarch. But behind this polished facade was a ruler who understood the ruthless realities of power. To control her vast and often unruly empire, she expanded and perfected a secret police and intelligence network that was one of the most formidable in Europe. Her eyes and ears were everywhere, from the glittering ballrooms of St. Petersburg to the remote villages of Siberia. Catherine came to power in a coup d'état in 1762, overthrowing her own husband, Peter III. As a German princess who had seized the Russian throne, her position was initially insecure. She was constantly on guard against plots and conspiracies. She knew that her survival depended on knowing what her enemies were thinking before they could act. She inherited a secret police organization, the Secret Chancellery, but she reorganized and expanded it. Under Catherine, it became a highly effective tool of state security. Its primary mission was to uncover and suppress any form of political dissent. This included plots against the Empress, criticism of the government, and any talk of rebellion. Catherine's intelligence network had several layers. The top were her trusted advisors and generals, who ran the official spy networks. They had agents in foreign courts gathering intelligence on the military and political plans of Russia's rivals, like the Ottoman Empire, Poland, and Prussia. This foreign intelligence was crucial for Catherine's aggressive and highly successful foreign policy, which greatly expanded the borders of the Russian Empire. But it was her domestic intelligence network that was truly pervasive. It relied on a huge number of informers. Government officials were required to report any seditious talk they overheard. The postal service was systematically monitored. Letters of private citizens, especially those of interest to the state, were opened, read, copied, and then resealed and sent on their way. A special department was dedicated to this task. The network extended deep into Russian society. Landowners were encouraged to report on their neighbors. Priests were sometimes used as informants, reporting on the mood of their parishioners. In the towns and villages, the police employed a network of local informers. This created an atmosphere where people were cautious about what they said, even to their friends. One of the greatest tests of Catherine's intelligence network was Pugachev's rebellion, a massive peasant and Cossack uprising that swept across Russia in the 1770s. The rebellion was a huge shock to the system, and for a time, it threatened the stability of Catherine's rule. The initial failure to suppress the rebellion highlighted some weaknesses in her intelligence gathering in the remote provinces. After the rebellion was brutally crushed, Catherine reformed her system of local government. One of the key aims of this reform was to improve the flow of information from the provinces to the capital. She wanted to ensure that she would never again be caught by surprise by such a massive uprising. The local police forces were strengthened, and the network of informers was made more systematic. Catherine was not just a passive consumer of intelligence. She was actively involved. She would read the reports from her spies and police chiefs. She sometimes personally interrogated important political prisoners. She understood that information was not just a defensive tool to prevent plots. It was also a tool for governing. The reports she received from across her empire gave her a detailed picture of the state of the country, the problems of her people, and the performance of her officials. She used this information to manage her public image. Catherine was obsessed with her reputation both in Russia and in Europe. Her spies reported on what people were saying about her. If a damaging rumor started to spread, her government would act quickly to counteract it with its own propaganda. Her famous correspondence with Voltaire and other philosophers was part of this information strategy. She was projecting an image of Russia as a modern and enlightened European power. Catherine the Great's reign is often called the golden age of the Russian Empire. It was a time of military victories, territorial expansion, and cultural flourishing. But this golden age was built on a foundation of absolute power, and that power was maintained by a vigilant and all-encompassing intelligence service. Her spies were not just in foreign courts, they were in every level of her own society. She was an enlightened despot who understood a very old truth to rule a vast empire. You must first know its secrets. Number 3 was a queen's social life a front for espionage. In the turbulent mid-16th century, Scotland was a battleground for the competing interests of two great powers, France and England. At the center of the struggle was Marie de Guise, a French noblewoman who was the wife of King James V of Scotland and the mother of the infant Mary, Queen of Scots. After her husband's death, she became the regent of Scotland. To protect her daughter's throne and to advance French interests, she operated a highly effective intelligence network that was run not from a military headquarters, but from the heart of the Scottish court. Her primary agents were her own French ladies-in-waiting. Marie de Guise arrived in Scotland in 1538. She was a member of one of the most powerful and ambitious families in France. Her mission was to bind Scotland firmly to its traditional ally, France, and to resist the growing influence of Protestant England to the south. This was a difficult task. The Scottish nobility was famously factious and unreliable. Many lords were secretly in the pay of the English. The Protestant Reformation was also beginning to take hold in Scotland, creating a powerful new faction that was naturally hostile to Catholic France. As regent, Marie de Guise needed to know who was loyal and who was a traitor. She needed to anticipate the moves of the English and their Scottish allies. She built an intelligence network that relied on subtlety and social access. The core of this network was the group of French courtiers and ladies-in-waiting she had brought with her to Scotland. These women, like Catherine de' Medici squadron in France, were more than just companions for the Queen. They were her political operatives. The Scottish court, like any other, was a hotbed of gossip, rumor, and intrigue. The French ladies were at the center of this social world. At dances, dinners, and hunts, they would engage the Scottish lords in conversation. They would listen, observe, and report back to Marie. They were looking for any piece of useful information. Which lord had secretly met with the English ambassador, who was in financial trouble and might be susceptible to a bribe, who was unhappy with the Queen Regent's policies. This was the kind of low-level, everyday intelligence that, when pieced together, could reveal a major conspiracy. Marie de Guise also had a more formal spy network. She used French funds to pay for a network of spies and informants across Scotland. She had agents in the major towns and ports. She even had spies in England who would send her reports on English troop movements and political developments at the court of Edward VI and later Queen Elizabeth I. She was also a master of communication. She maintained a constant and secret correspondence with her powerful family in France and with the French king. She used trusted couriers to carry her coded messages. These letters were not just family news, they were detailed intelligence reports and requests for money, troops, and political support. This information flow was essential for coordinating French and Scottish strategy against the English. One of the most dramatic moments of her regency was when she successfully smuggled her young daughter, Mary, to France in 1548. The English were trying to force a marriage between the young Mary and their own boy king, Edward VI, a policy known as the rough wooing. This would have effectively ended Scottish independence. Marie de Guise, using a combination of military force and brilliant deception, managed to get her daughter to the coast and onto a French ship, right under the noses of the English fleet. This move required precise timing and excellent intelligence about English naval positions. Marie de Guise's intelligence network allowed her to survive as regent for years in an incredibly hostile environment. She played the different noble factions off against each other. She used her French money and troops to maintain control. She successfully navigated the complex politics of the Scottish Reformation. However, in the end, the forces against her were too strong. The tide of Protestantism in Scotland, backed by English money and military support, led to a major rebellion in 1559. Even Marie's sophisticated intelligence network could not defeat a popular religious revolution. She died in Edinburgh Castle in 1560, just as her French forces were being forced to withdraw from Scotland. Although she ultimately failed to keep Scotland in the French Catholic camp, her long and skillful regency was a testament to her political ability. She was a foreign queen who managed to rule a fiercely independent and divided country for years. She did it by understanding that in the Game of Thrones, information is the most valuable commodity. Her court was not just a place of culture and refinement, it was a listening post, and her ladies-in-waiting were her most trusted spies. Number 2, could a queen's charity hide a spy ring? In the late 19th century, the Kingdom of Hawaii was in peril. Powerful American business interests, primarily sugar planters, were seeking to annex the islands to the United States. The last sovereign monarch of Hawaii, Queen Liliuokalani, fought a desperate and ultimately losing battle to preserve her nation's independence. To counter the powerful and well-funded annexationists, she relied on the loyalty of her people and a quiet, informal intelligence network that operated under the cover of cultural and charitable organizations. Liliuokalani ascended to the throne in 1891. She was a well-educated, determined, and deeply patriotic woman. She was concerned that the Hawaiian monarchy had lost too much power to foreign business interests under the so-called Bayonet Constitution of 1887, which had been forced upon her brother, the previous king. She sought to draft a new constitution that would restore power to the monarchy and to the native Hawaiian people. This move was the trigger for her opponents. In January 1893, a group of American and European businessmen, with the support of the United States minister and a contingent of U.S. Marines, overthrew the Queen in a bloodless coup. They established a provisional government and began to lobby Washington for annexation. Liliuokalani did not give up. Although she was under house arrest, she began a campaign of nonviolent resistance. Her intelligence network was the foundation of this campaign. It was not a network of professional spies. It was a network of ordinary Hawaiian citizens who remained loyal to their queen. The key hubs for this network were the Hiwi Aloha Aina, or Hawaiian Patriotic Leagues. There was one for men and one for women. On the surface, these were civic and cultural organizations dedicated to preserving Hawaiian culture and supporting the community. But they were also the nerve centers of the royalist resistance. Members of the Hui Aloha Aina acted as the Queen's agents. They secretly circulated petitions against annexation. This was a massive intelligence gathering and political organizing effort. They went door to door, village to village, across all the islands, collecting signatures. This was dangerous work. The new provisional government was hostile and repressive, but the people responded. They signed the petitions in overwhelming numbers. This key resistance petition drive was a clear demonstration to the U.S. government that the vast majority of Hawaiians did not want to be annexed. The network also gathered intelligence on the activities of the provisional government and the annexationists. Loyalists who worked as clerks in government offices, as servants in the homes of American businessmen, or as dock workers in Honolulu Harbor would pass on any information they could. They would report on who was meeting with whom on the arrival of ships and on the plans of the new government. This information was funneled back to the royalist leadership, allowing them to anticipate the moves of their opponents. Liliuokalani herself was the heart of the resistance. From her confinement, she sent out secret messages and instructions. She wrote letters to U.S. President Grover Cleveland, pleading her case. Her network smuggled these communications out of Hawaii and to the United States. For a time, it seemed like her strategy might work. President Cleveland, after receiving a report from an investigator he had sent to Hawaii, agreed that the overthrow had been illegal and tried to have the Queen restored to her throne. However, the provisional government refused to step down. In 1895, a group of royalists attempted a counter-revolution. It failed quickly. In the aftermath, the provisional government claimed to have found evidence that the Queen had known about the plot. They arrested her, put her on trial in her own throne room, and formally abdicated her. She was sentenced to 5 years of hard labor, though this was later commuted to imprisonment in a single room in Iolani Palace. Even in prison, she continued to resist. Her network was broken, but her spirit was not. After her release, she continued to fight for her people and for the restoration of their sovereignty. She traveled to Washington, D.C. to present the anti-annexation petitions, which contained the signatures of nearly the entire adult native Hawaiian population. The petitions helped to defeat an annexation treaty in the U.S. Senate. However, in 1898, during the Spanish-American War, Hawaii was annexed by the United States through a joint resolution of Congress, which required a lower threshold for passage. The Liliuokalani story is a tragic one. She was a queen who was overthrown by a foreign power, but her resistance was a testament to her courage and the loyalty of her people. Her spy ring was not one of cloak and dagger. It was a grassroots network of citizens bound together by a love for their country and their queen. But they used petitions and information, not weapons, to fight for their independence. Their efforts, though they failed to prevent annexation, left a powerful legacy of resistance that continues to inspire the movement for Hawaiian sovereignty today. Number 1. What if a queen's greatest weapon was her enemy's arrogance? In the heart of the Byzantine Empire, the city of Palmyra rose. Ruled by the determined Queen Zenobia, she dared to challenge the dominion of Rome. The lifeblood of her empire was the intricate network of trade routes that snaked across the desert. These were her arteries of commerce and, more importantly, her channels of intelligence. Every merchant leading a caravan of camels laden with spices and silks was a potential informant, an eye and ear in the far-flung corners of her burgeoning empire. Zenobia's rise was meteoric. As regent for her young son, she was not content to merely hold power, she sought to expand it. Her ambitions were fueled by a constant stream of information. Her merchant spies brought her news of weak Roman garrisons, of political instability in Egypt, and of the shifting allegiances of desert tribes. This intelligence was not just raw data, it was the foundation of her military strategy. She knew where to strike because she knew where the Roman Empire was weak. Her conquest of Egypt, a swift and decisive campaign, was a testament to the quality of her intelligence. She seized the breadbasket of Rome because her agents had told her the granary door was unlocked. Governing her new empire, stretching from Turkey to Egypt, was a monumental task. Here, too, her intelligence network was paramount. The same caravan routes that brought her news of her enemies now brought her information about her new subjects. Fast camel-mounted messengers, the Desert's Express service, carried reports of local unrest or administrative corruption back to Palmyra. This allowed her to project power and maintain control over a vast and diverse territory. Zenobia was not just a conqueror, she was a manager, and her management style was based on information. She also understood the power of narrative. Her court was a beacon of culture and learning, a conscious effort to portray her empire not as a rogue state, but as a legitimate successor to the great Hellenistic kingdoms. This was information warfare aimed at winning the hearts and minds of her subjects and earning the respect of her rivals. But the Roman Empire, even in crisis, was a formidable foe. The Emperor Aurelian, a hardened soldier, would not tolerate such a challenge to Roman authority. As his legions marched east, the intelligence war reached its peak. Zenobia's agents tracked his every move, but Aurelian's army was a relentless machine. After 2 decisive defeats, Zenobia was forced back into the magnificent walls of Palmyra. The final act was a gamble. Under the cover of darkness, she slipped out of the besieged city on a swift camel, a desperate bid to reach Persia and rally support. But Roman intelligence had its own sources. An informant, a betrayal, a lucky patrol. The details are lost to history, but the outcome is not. She was captured before she could reach safety. Her capture broke the will of her city. The Palmyrene Empire, a brilliant flash of defiance in the long history of Rome, was extinguished. Zenobia's story is a powerful illustration of an intelligence network built on the unique circumstances of its time and place. She weaponized the tools of commerce, turning merchants into spies and trade routes into information highways. For a time, this network allowed her to outmaneuver the most powerful empire in the world. Her downfall was a reminder that in the world of espionage, no advantage is permanent, and a single intelligence failure can be fatal. She was a queen who built an empire on secrets, whispered in the desert, a testament to the power of information to change the course of history, if only for a while.